Hi, I'm Sanaya,
And I'm Ketki.
and we're Thinking People. And today, we're thinking about being a pop music fan in 2024, how fandom has evolved to fans feeling an outsized sense of ownership over the artist and their choices, and how this affects our relationship with the music at the heart of it.
Life moves fast. Tune in to think about it. All right. Hello, hello.
Hi, Ketki.
Welcome to another episode of Thinking People.
Another end of year 2024 in review episode. And as pop music fans, we decided to dedicate an entire episode to being a pop music fan this year.
Big year for pop music.
Inflection point, actually. I think just the number of albums that came out this year, it was overwhelming to keep up with everything. I still don't think that I've heard everything that came out from major artists, I would say, because of course there's always a lot of music every year. But this marquee year with Beyonce and Ariana and Taylor and Billie and who else? Charlie XCX, of course. And
Yeah.
then newer pop stars who we did not think would be quite as big, but had these rocket ship years like Sabrina
Sabrina.
Chapel, obviously, but even though her album came out last year, but this is a year that made her. But yeah, I think one thing for our listeners is that if you listen to our Taylor Swift episode where we were talking about being Swifties, Taylor Swift fans, dissecting our relationship with her music, her celebrity a little bit, we attended the Eras tour earlier this year. And it was an interesting experience as a fan, especially because at least I have never had access to that scale of concert before in that big of a venue. So we watched her in June at Wembley Stadium in London. So I thought a good point to kind of start off with is, just what was it like attending the Eras tour? How did it feel for you as a fan to
Yeah.
finally be there? And yeah, what was it like seeing Taylor live?
Oh my God. Where do I start? I do want to also note that we have not discussed this, you and I. I think we've sort of talked about a few things, but I think after the concert was over, both you and I were like, okay, there's a lot to dissect here. And I think I was thinking about the concert for months after that because I had a lot of feelings. I mean, first and foremost, same thing for me. I have attended a bunch of, different types of concerts. I haven't attended even as someone who's a pop fan, but now more so a vocal pop fan as than I was in the past. I feel like I've now attended more pop concerts, but not as many. Like I think I've attended more like alternative rock indie concerts. So it's still very different to that. And I have definitely not attended a concert of this scale ever. And I think most people who've attended the Eras tour would probably say that because it's huge, not just in terms of just how many people were attending, but also sort of, what it even meant to be there. I think for me, outside of just seeing Taylor in the flesh, which of course, I mean, we'll get to that. Like that was a big, oh my God, aha moment. Like we had booked the tickets like a year prior to that. So we were leading up to that moment. But I think the biggest thing for me, or the biggest takeaway, was the community and feeling that, in person. I think like when you become a Taylor fan, you very quickly, very swiftly rather, get embedded into the Swifty community. And most of it is just online, right? And you sort of have a sense of, okay, this is how these fans interact with each other. But I think it was very, very interesting to see that in person. And I remember when I posted like pictures from the concert on my Instagram, like my caption was, "This is girlhood." And I really felt that. Like I was like, these are just all women around me that are kind of embracing girlhood in a sense, or their inner girl child. I think that's something that really came up for me and I felt that very viscerally, and I think that was a big, big takeaway for me from the concert.
Yeah, no, when you see her on stage for the first time, it's a surreal moment. I don't think I have suspended my disbelief even to this day. I don't think I fully processed exactly what that experience was like. And I think the same thing, I feel like on and off, I've been thinking about it for the past 6 months. What did it mean to be there? What does it mean for music? What did it mean for me personally? Because I think something that I didn't expect going into it, or sometimes what happens when you're a fan and you're caught up in your fandom for this person, is I know that for all of us, it was like a once in a lifetime kind of experience to be there. There were 88,000 other people in the stadium with us. At one point, the stadium floor started shaking. I thought I was going to die, but one thing that I definitely felt from her performance was that, this woman has done this over 100 times. Like, for her, it is one more date, one more performance. So I definitely felt that. And I don't know if it's a good thing or a bad thing, because I feel like the scale of this production, just how meticulous it is, you need it to be thoroughly rehearsed. So you're not really going to have many instances where, like, off the cuff, spontaneous things are happening. So I feel like there was such a stark contrast between the entire show and the surprise song section, because I think that's when, yeah, you got those more organic moments from her where I actually felt like, she's jamming in front of 90,000 people. And, she would talk to us in between, in between the verses, and just sort of do a little bit of commentary during the song. So you knew that, she was in the moment performing something that she had to like be present for. So, I mean, all of this is making it sound like I felt like it was an overly rehearsed performance. And I guess it was, but it had to be. You cannot do it. This is like a Broadway musical level perfection in terms of executing a performance. And it had to be. And it had to be like that.
I actually made the same note. You mentioned Broadway, and I was like, yeah, it's very akin to a theater production. Like there is very little to no room for anything organic. And going into this concert, like we had watched the Eras Tour film, which in retrospect I wish I hadn't, because I feel like you become too well versed with the production, right? Like you know exactly what's coming, and spoiled it for me a little bit. Like if I can be honest, and I feel like a lot of other critics, people have felt this way. But even having watched the Eras film, I was still expecting her to do some kind of like crowd work or like something in the middle of the set. Because every other concert that I've been for, like I've been for a Paramore concert, I've been for a Bon Iver concert, like they have their set. And of course, the scale is definitely nowhere the same, but there's a lot of acknowledgement of the crowd, and sort of like kind of there's something different that you sort of bring to it each time. And you can kind of you see that the musician or the artist is sort of responding and reacting to the crowd in real time. Definitely didn't feel that way about this. And like you said, is it a good or a bad thing? I guess it depends on how you feel about it or like what it gives you. Because I think had I not watched the Eras Tour film and I was watching this production for the first time, I would have received it like a theatrical production. I would have received it like going for a Broadway show and being completely overwhelmed and being like, oh my God, wow. But because I watched the film, I now know exactly what to expect. And there's nothing new that I'm getting except for, like you said, the acoustic set, which is the only time where she is very active and present. So,
But that same quality that you and I are talking about is the reason why people go for it multiple times. They want to relive that entire experience. That's also the same reason why people watch the same Broadway play over and over again, because they want to go through that journey in exactly the same way again. And that familiarity is something that people appreciate as well. One of the most striking things that I felt when I saw it, which I think was something that definitely shifted my perspective on both Taylor Swift, as well as, just thinking more personally about the way in which I view certain things in my own life, which is that, when you're seeing her on stage, the most striking thing for me was that this was a woman doing her job on
yeah.
stage. And I think whenever Taylor has said this, and I've found it equally striking every time she mentions this, is that she really views her musical output as work, something that you and I will think is the artistic creation of a once in a generation singer songwriter, she thinks of as her job, right? And you know, she said as much, like in Miss Americana, she's mentioned that, you know, if you don't reinvent yourself in that little monologue, if you don't reinvent yourself, you're out of a job. And I can do it with a broken heart. She says, try and come for my job. So you know, repeatedly she's referred to her career as a musician as work and a job that she has. And in my mind, it's weird to think of what she does as work or a job because it's, you know, like a creative pursuit, something that I, you know, have aspirations for, have not been able to do it. And you kind of put anything creative on this other kind of pedestal. And it was interesting to see that for her, she's like, no, this is something that requires work ethic. This is something that requires rehearsal, dedication, practice, and doing something over and over and over and over again. And I really felt that in that performance. And if this is her job, like, you know, even though she is on stage performing songs that she has written about her life, there was a very real sense that she was going to get off stage and go back to her real life.
Mm.
I think that's where the live experience really helped, because I feel like as a fan, you're listening to music a little bit from a distance. But then when I saw this, I realized that, oh, okay, her, you know, there's it's so easy to like fall for that illusion that what she's singing about is her real life. It isn't.
Yeah.
It isn't. It's what she's choosing to show us.
Yeah.
It's what she's choosing to put up on stage. And, you know, on a at a very visceral level, it made me want more from my own life, which is that, oh, okay, you know, even like sometimes I get so like flustered about, you know, am I doing something creative? Am I like following my dreams? You know, those sorts of things. But even Taylor Swift, who's doing arguably most creative job in the whole wide world, still wants to sign off, right?
Yeah.
I'm going back to my boyfriend. I'm going back to my family. I'm done. Work is ending over here. So that was a very interesting thing. It was very palpable to me. I don't know if I'm like projecting something onto her, but it definitely felt like, you know, I'm here for my job. I clock out and I'm
Yeah.
gonna.
And I think so we went for the first London show, which was on 21st of June. I don't remember what number of show this is, but she's obviously played all of America, and I think she's done a bunch of European shows at this point. And I remember like you and I spoke that she looked tired. Like she it's a athletic feat, this performance. I mean, you have to be incredibly freaking fit in order to do this. I was struggling to even stand. By the third hour I was like dying. So it's insane that she's even been able to do something. It's not only like intellectually demanding, it's like physically demanding, right? And but you see that this is someone who has like been grinding for so long, and that's why you draw parallels to even the idea that this is like her job. Because at your job also, you're new and shiny on like 1st or 2nd of Jan, and then by the time October rolls around, you're exhausted. So that was interesting.
Yeah, and you know, I feel like what it did make me excited for, honestly, is like a late career Taylor doing
Yeah.
like an acoustic only tour.
Yeah.
You know, I think it would be an actually like amazing experience. I don't know if we'll ever get to do this, is if we are able to be like in like a smaller, more intimate
With
space.
setting. Yeah.
Yeah, with
Yeah.
her just with her guitar, like if we were a part of that NPR Tiny Desk, you know, like for
Yeah.
example, I feel like that would have been like something incredibly special.
I really think that this is one of the things that you feel the most, because the acoustic set is, of course, it's the more organic part of the show. You don't really know what to expect, but you see her real power come through when it's just her, you know, hundreds of thousands of people, but it's just her and her guitar. And that's who she is. When you strip away all of the production and everything, and that's who she is, and that's her at her most powerful. And of course you know this, but I think it's in her acoustic set that you really witness that.
Yeah, that is Taylor Swift at her most powerful. And I think sometimes as a fan, my desire is for her, and I know this is the case for a lot of Taylor fans, is that, the pop stuff is great,
Yeah.
but you are at your most powerful when it's just you and your guitar. And like when she embraces it in, a more authentic way than she did in Folklore and Evermore, because I think those two albums were, you know intimate and acoustic, but as an aesthetic,
Yeah.
not necessarily as a sound.
Mm.
So I feel like when she does it in the sound as well, where it's stripped down, not as elaborately produced, I feel like that's Taylor Swift at her most powerful.
I think even in the Reputation tour, what's the song that she performs on acoustically? Is it King of My Heart? Or
Dancing with Our Hands Tied and
yeah.
All Too Well.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and Dancing with My Hands Tied is a song that I didn't really enjoy in its original production, but like when I watched her play it acoustically, it's a completely different
It's an amazing
song.
song.
It's an
Yeah.
it's a completely different song. I wanna ask, like, was there a moment when you got emotional during the show?
I feel like the moment where I did get like physiologically emotional, where like, you're welling up and tearing up, that actually happened, I think, during the Paramore set. Yeah, that happened to
Interesting.
me. That happened to me during The Only Exception. And that's
Wow.
because of the way what was happening in front of us, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And I, even though like I've been like very online throughout the Eras tour. I had seen a lot of clips of even Haley Williams and Taylor York, performing it when they go
Yeah,
up. It's just both of them on stage, and both of them go up to the very front of the stage, and they're looking at each other, and
yeah.
it's just a guitar and her voice, right?
It's
It's his
beautiful.
guitar, her voice,
Yeah.
and also the fact that that song was written about somebody else. She's been through everything that she's been through, and now they're together, but he was always in the band. So I feel like all of that kind of combined, and also the Paramore section of the show was not something that was circulating through a concert or a documentary or anything like that. So
Yeah.
that was like very fresh. So I think that's when I got emotional. And I also got emotional when we got there, because I've told everyone this, that if I didn't have a job, if I wasn't working, there was no way that I could have gone for this. Like it made me appreciate my life in a completely different way. So yeah, that's
Shout
when I
out
got
to our
emotional.
desk jobs. Yeah. I agree. That was a very, like, beautiful moment, and for me, it was like seeing Paramore live for the second time, and I think, like, it's been an interesting journey, and it was really interesting that Paramore is opening for Taylor. Like, I was very excited about that because I've gone through an entire journey with Taylor. I used to be a huge fan, then stopped being a fan, and then became a fan again after Folklore. And Paramore, I was obsessed with as a teenager as well. So I was like very excited about that. And the I remember I didn't get teary eyed, but I remember being in my feels a little bit when The Only Exception, like, I mean, when Haley was singing The Only Exception, because it was written in a very different context, that song. So it gives it new meaning. I got emotional during All Too Well, 10-minute version. I
Interesting.
did tear up. It's just I don't know why. I really don't know why, but it was just like that song has been such a highlight of these past couple of years and such an incredible achievement. And like I just teared up at being able to witness it live. I think that was a big thing for me.
Similar to The Only Exception, All Too Well is also a song that has gone on its journey for over a span of 10 years, having been written in one form and
Yeah.
released and known by the world in one form. And now it has been recontextualized
Yeah.
and given new meaning. Essentially, there were moments where your fan journey kind of comes alive, right? Like where
Mm.
you are sort of looking back on the last 10 years of being a fan of this music. And I think one, because we're talking about fandom more
Yeah.
broadly in this episode, I was also curious to know what your thoughts were on the way in which people are expressing their fandom online. To, of course, the Era Store, that's one part of it, but also to the Tortured Poets department, because I feel like I definitely felt like this album has been slightly misunderstood, at least from my perspective,
Hmm.
because I do think that this is an album which is quite directly Taylor's relationship or changing relationship with her fans
Yeah.
and her fame
Yeah.
in a way that she just hasn't sort of written or sung in this way
Yeah.
before. And even Reputation, even though that album is like, really in your face about her celebrity, but it was more about her celebrity at a moment in time vis-a-vis a feud that
Hmm.
she got caught up in. This I felt like was a little more existential. Like, who is she as an artist? What is her relationship with fans? Is she going to keep servicing everything that they want all the
Yeah.
time? So, yeah, what were your thoughts on just online fan chatter?
I think similar to your point, this album release cycle, it made me first and foremost kind of reflect. Like it's a symbiotic relationship, like Taylor's relationship with her fans and vice versa, right? Like it's she is an Easter egger, fans lap it up, eat it up. And so there is a that fan relationship that she has. She's played a very active role historically, presently, in nurturing it. Like there's you can't say that she's had limited part to play, or people are sort of idolizing her, or like have kind of created this image of her that isn't that she in it doesn't have any involvement with. Like I don't think that's true. And in fact, like her relationship with her fans is particularly interesting. But in this album, right, like you said, like she addresses sort of like the how sort of like she addresses some of the ways in which this may impact her negatively. And it's in the context of her relationship with Matty Healy, which I was just like, that's an interest, like, it, that's an interesting hill to kind of die on in that sense, because I think she talks about this in the song, But Daddy, I Love Him, right? And she says something like Sarah's and Hannah's in their Sunday best, clutching their pearls, sighing, what a mess, alluding to her fans, kind of like talking about her relationship with Matty Healy and being like, oh, Taylor, why have you chosen to date this guy, right? And what I found interesting about this song is that she kind of echoes like the rebellion of a teenage girl who is resisting her father. So, in a way, she's equating the disapproval of her fans to that of of a father, like a fatherly disapproval of like, I don't approve of the man you're dating, which is quite telling. Because if you were to really go deep into that, you're just like, okay, so does she secretly wish for their approval in the way that you would wish for the approval of your father? And then when they
Wow.
don't approve of it, you're just like, oh, but daddy, I love him and I'm pregnant with his child and screw you. I don't know if I'm
Yeah.
reading too much into it, but this was my analysis. And I was like, this is so complicated. Like,
Yeah.
that is insanely complicated, a sentiment to even express through a song. One of my favorites, by the way, on the album.
Yeah. No, I agree. I think like it made me think about fandom in a different way. So I think I was very unquestioning and uncritical, you know, up until like, of course, like attending the concert, thinking a little bit more about what has been written in this album, even like witnessing instances online of people sort of, very famous people saying that they don't want the kind of relationship with fans where fans feel like they have some kind of ownership over them. So I know that Doja Cat is a good example of this, where she said
Chapel. Yeah.
Chapel more recently, who became like the focus of a lot of online attention this year because she said, I don't want that kind of relationship. I don't want to subscribe to these made up rules around how to interact with fans just because you're a famous person, or that the idea that that kind of ownership is just part and parcel. And if you're consenting to being famous, you have to consent to this as well. So I do think that older musicians and stars like Taylor also subscribe to that or privately feel that way,
Hmm.
and have probably come from this school of thought in which you have to be outwardly grateful at all times. In this album, I just felt like so much resentment, right? At its core, I felt like Tortured Poets Department is an album about a person who thinks that it is her quote unquote job to write about her emotions and experiences to satiate this broad demand for it. And that is why she's churning out songs. So I
Mm.
even found it interesting that she called it the Tortured Poets Department, like two notions of a department being like a psych ward, but department also being like a department in an office.
Yeah.
That's what you see in the Fortnite videos. So she's like, yeah, it's my job to constantly have my finger on the pulse for what these people who have brought me where I am today want. And I need to keep churning out songs, keep
Mm.
churning out songs. And of course, you feel it most blatantly in But Daddy, I Love Him. But it's
Yeah,
also there in I Can Do It With a Broken Heart. I think
absolutely.
that
Yeah.
song, she's like everyone's shouting more, and I feel like I just need to figure out how to give them what they want consistently. And it's even there in Clara Bow where she says that, I need to be flesh and blood among war machines,
Mm.
and that's what people want. People want me to dazzle them, I'm going to dazzle them. It's there in How Did It End? this
Mm.
this idea that everything that's happening in her life is fair game.
Yeah.
It's uh it's public, it's a subject of public discourse. So
Mm.
she as an artist, and I think she's also reckoning with that relationship that she herself has nurtured, right? Like
Yeah.
as you said, she's been Easter egging, she has been singing about her life since like day one. So the idea is that if a relationship ends, she needs to provide a reason
Mm.
through her songs to satiate this demand from her fervent fan base who have come
Mm.
to expect that she will give explanations.
Mm.
So and that song, How Did It End, is basically like, I don't know what to tell you guys. It just ended.
Mm.
I'm that crazy person in the grocery store and I don't know what to say to you. Like,
Yeah.
so I found her this resentment towards, this relationship with her fans, the pressure she feels to constantly churn music out.
Yeah.
I felt that so much in Tortured Poets Department, and I've like increasingly felt it the more I listen to it.
Mm.
Um, and I mean, the last concert just ended a few days ago, and I am getting such a IDGAF vibe towards fans right now, where
Mm.
everyone was expecting that she's gonna announce, Reputation or the debut or like debutation, both like a double drop or whatever. And she just did nothing. She just said, I'm signing off. Bye guys. Here's my
Uh,
Instagram photo dump. I'm
yeah.
done.
Yeah.
See you.
I also thought that she would go off with more of a bang. But it's interesting what you said about the album, right? Like it's so complex because it kind of also ties into what you said, like what you said about her viewing this as a job. I've also thought of her as an artist who likes to iterate on her formulas. So I think like she can be fairly like formulaic about in the sense of okay, I feel like when I sing about my life, fans really react to it. I think she's hyper aware of the fact that the reason people relate to her and the reason she's amassed this fan base is because she holds up a mirror to people's lives and she's like, this is my deeply personal experience. And her fans right from the debut have really really related to that. And I think that with each successive album she keeps sort of iterating on that idea. And so in a sense it's like she's just doing her job. She knows this is gonna, you can also read it as her relationship with Matty Healy ended. She knows it's going to people will be asking questions about it. And maybe she knows it's going to be a successful album if she like puts out songs about Matty Healy. I think that there is a businesswoman and a very hard worker at like who's like, looking at this at as her job, and maybe she even has a resistance to that. And like so I don't know, it's very complex basically. And you can analyze it in so many different ways.
So I think now this brings me to like the second part of what I wanted to discuss today, which is, just thinking about as fans for you and me, like, what is our equation or relationship with an artist's business ambitions? or the
Mm.
business decisions that they take, right?
Yeah.
Like, for example, like this year, there was a lot of conversation around the many variants of Tortured Poets Department,
Mm.
strategically announced and released to block, allegedly, to block other musicians from going to number one on the Billboard Top 200. And this kind of reached a boiling point in June, around the time we were in the UK, when Charlie XCX was releasing Brat. And it seemed that Brat would be going to number one, but Taylor then, dropped one or two more variants for sale exclusively in the UK. And many people believed that this was a very, very overt attempt to block Charlie's album from going number one. And I think both of them are an interesting juxtaposition because, like we've been speaking about so far, um, Taylor views her music as a job that she does. Charlie has very often, spoken about artistry and how artistry is something that's completely different. It's building a world for people to inhabit. And, it's not just about songs and it's not just about music, it's about your vision. So, Charlie talks a lot in those terms, and
Yeah.
that's kind of been her language, being this like niche kind of tastemaker, trendsetter for pop music. So, what were your thoughts on that little battle to the top of the charts that happened over there, and Taylor's decision to release as many variants as she did?
You can't deny that it was deliberate. Because the other additional detail there is that like she released those two UK, two or three, I'm not sure, UK only variants for 24 hours only. So that means that your sales are bound to go up, and that it was like apparently on a very strategic date, just before or right after Brat came out. I'm not exactly sure, but the day on which like the chart rankings are calculated, or it would impact the chart rankings in a very real way. Now, is she the mastermind sitting behind closed doors and being like, Charlie's album is releasing, we should do this? Probably not. But I think that she has like a media marketing machinery that is telling her to do this. And I don't think she's actively saying no. So there was a lot of flack. And what was, I think, a very, very positive sentiment towards Taylor, that had been building since 2020, like I think it suddenly turned very sharply in the wake of Brat Summer and especially this, I think, and especially the TTPD rollout, and that she would even after that like continue to drop like different versions. I believe she dropped like 30. I'm not sure. I did have a number. I'll pull it up really quickly, but like it was too many versions of this album.
So, I actually have like a slightly different take on this
Mm,
entire thing. So, I don't deny that it was deliberate.
yeah.
Okay. I do think so. I think that there is, some kind of like strategizing that does happen. I mean, all sorts of things. All of these are business decisions, right? Like I think one thing that makes people a little uncomfortable, I believe, is when you start seeing the marketing and business machinations behind the quote unquote artistry. But my argument is that it's not like someone like Charlie is not thinking in business terms,
That's true.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Everybody is. Everybody
Mm.
is. But what you've got here is the most commercially successful person and their business moves. So that obviously like is always thrown into incredibly sharp relief. So if you think about like TTBD's many variants, so if there are, let's say, 13 to 14 of them, and they all have like one live version of a different song, right? Um, if she had, let's say, released a live album in December,
Mm.
it would have been received very differently, right?
Wow.
But like in summation, it's somebody who realized that actually, why should I wait until December? Um, why don't I just release like the same album with um with one additional song which is different in each of the variants? But that is the business brain becoming incredibly visible. But I think you're right. Like, I think online, I saw a tweet from someone who said that, their fandom for Taylor Swift was from 2012 and it ended in 2024. And it was like, a gravestone with like a start date and an end date. And they're like, this is the year I'm going to stop being Taylor's fan or whatever. And, it was interesting to me that I'm like, oh, okay, so this person's like business decisions are what are causing you to decide to not be somebody's fan. Right. And and there was a lot of like sentiment that this is around her wanting to earn as much money as possible. This is a capitalistic person. I feel like, calling Taylor Swift capitalistic is like, calling the sky blue. I feel like you don't need to you don't need to do that, right?
Yeah.
You don't need to go out of your way to make that kind of a judgment or put that label on her. But what I don't agree with is I don't think she's doing it for money, or not only the money, or that isn't the primary reason.
Mm.
I just felt like this was a person who was no longer the center of the discourse around pop music. She was not the person defining
Yeah.
what direction pop music would be taking in 2024. She was at the center in 2023. And arguably, from 2020 until 2023, Taylor Swift was the most culturally significant mainstream pop artist.
Yeah.
And during those years, when she was comfortable in her cultural relevance, she released multiple albums, but she didn't
Yeah.
do this thing where she had multiple variants, right? Or
Mm.
maybe if she did, it was like two, maybe three, and that's on par with other artists, like the different colored vinyls and whatnot.
Yeah.
But I genuinely felt like Tortured Poets came out. It had like an insane response in terms of like the meta narrative about the relationship. A lot of people bought it, more than 2 million copies, and or like album equivalent units sold in the first week. But that's not the music conversation, right? The music conversation was Brat, the music conversation was Sabrina Carpenter, and the music conversation was Chapel Roan. And TTPD did not make a splash musically. So I felt like this was a person who's like, I'm feeling my cultural relevance fade away a little bit. Like
Yeah.
pop is moving past me. So I
Mm.
felt like that's where that was coming from. So I didn't really see it as like this woman just wants as much money as possible. I'm like, no, she wants to continue to be a part of the conversation,
Yeah.
which I don't know how as a fan we want to take that or receive that, but I felt like that was the sense that I was getting. But
I
yeah,
do you think that she's relented a little bit because she could have made a splash with like the last era's tour performance, and I was expecting her to do something. She did nothing. It was just any other show. And you sort of mentioned that it could have also just been kind of maybe her anger towards her fans, or just not wanting to partake in that and not really wanting to give us anything more. But maybe she's just like, you know what, cool. It was all about Brad Summer. It was all about Sabrina Carpenter. It was all about whatever else. It's fine. That's what it's about. And I don't want to kind of steal the spotlight, or I'm not really interested in that right now. I'm frankly too tired, which is fair.
yeah. I think this is an artist who is very like keenly aware of public perceptions of herself.
Mm,
And I think if at all she lost the plot a little bit with all those variants, I think she kind of knows that, at after a certain point, people do not want to hear from me. Maybe don't want another Taylor's version. And I feel like, yeah, maybe she got to the point where she's like, I don't need to be in this overcrowded space where there's so much that's happening and I am not meeting that moment in the same way. Or maybe she entered her IDGAF about all of this era and is like, you know what? I don't want to plan another rollout for another
yeah.
album. I don't feel like doing that. But what I think, just going back to an artist's business ambitions, I think the way I like to think about pop music or anything popular is like where art and business kind of meet. So I think
Mm,
it's like incorrect to assume that, Taylor Swift is just commercial and Charli XCX is just art, is pure artistry, right? Like, if you're popular, and if those are the two parameters that you're looking at, popular music or popular culture always combines both of those elements. And I actually found it very interesting that that kind of a very like strong reaction to a marketing and rollout for Tortured Poets department. I think an something that was happening at the opposite end of the spectrum was the response to Brat's marketing campaign,
Yeah.
right? The very memeable cover art slash template,
Yeah.
whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
Um,
Which is
the
which is capitalizing on fan reaction to it, right? Like, because when the album art dropped, it was like, it's not. I don't think Charlie's team had the intention, and I think I looked this up, that this would become a meme template. It very organically became that, and then they created the Brat generator.
Exactly. And also the fact that, the Apple dance, right? Like they said, oh, okay, there's a viral dance trend, TikTok dance trend around this. But this was an album cycle that had memeable artwork, a TikTok dance trend, um, a very star-studded remix album, big brand collaborations, because through Charlie's like collaboration with H&M, she was able to do a pop-up concert in
Mm,
Times Square.
yeah.
And I felt like this is a big tent, you know, pop rollout and marketing campaign. And it's not very different from other pop stars and the kinds of marketing campaigns they have. And Charlie herself, right? Charlie herself has tried to do some meta commentary on marketing her album, where before she announced Brat, and I think at this time only Von Dutch had been announced as the lead single. This was around February. She did this thing with a lot of the people who appeared in the 360 video. Rachel Sennett was definitely among them. I don't remember
Julia
the others.
Julia Fox.
No, I think Julia Fox only comes in for the video, but like, but basically, a lot of her like influencer internet friends, she recorded them sort of saying that they're holding up a paper to the camera and they're saying that this is a list of um canceled marketing ideas, right?
Oh, I've seen this. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then they were saying things like one canceled idea is that, Charlie leaks the sex tape and Von Dutch is playing in the background. So basically they were using the idea of marketing as a marketing campaign for the album.
Yeah.
So so I feel, and then,
Yeah.
whenever I see reactions online where everyone's like, this marketing is so good and like that decision is so bad, it makes me, I don't know, it makes me really wonder, because um where has fandom kind of come, where it's not as much about the listening experience anymore, or how you're relating to a song and its lyrics. It's also about these extra musical business decisions of how you're selling. How are you selling something? Are you selling something in the way that we want you to sell something? So I
Mm.
find that to be very interesting.
I have found it interesting that, like, a lot of Brad's marketing campaign is reactive. Like, everything you mentioned, the Brad generator, the meme template, etc. Even the Apple dance, and even the concept of Brad's summer. I know these are themes in the music, and I think that the album is very, very strong, because it directly, like, it's the antithesis of, like, this, like, idea of, like, clean living, and, like, what's has typically been in vogue, and, like, definitely compared to last summer, which was like Barbie summer, and Taylor Swift, was sort of the reigning pop queen last year. It's the complete antithesis of that, right? Like, you are doing drugs in the club, wearing crop tops and, like, leather boots, and, like, you're that girl. You're bumping that basically. But I think, like, the idea of having a Brad Summer was also fan made. which then the Brat marketing team reacted to, responded to, and of course Charlie too. And then they kind of like capitalized on that and then made it like this trending term. So it's interesting how that has played into it. Like I think she perhaps like Charlie and the Brat marketing team have not gotten as much flack because their marketing has seemed organic in comparison to TTPT for this very reason.
I I think that Brat's biggest achievement, or the thing that I thought that was like truly the artistic sort of achievement of Brat the album, was this articulation in a single word of an experience that a lot of people are probably going through, right? The idea that maybe you're not going to make good decisions all the time, but you sort of luxuriate in the bad decisions because that's what life is, but you have this outward bravado, but you're also quite vulnerable internally. And I think that this album is very much an album about being in your early 30s and kind of like reevaluating some of the decisions you've made before, but also being like, you know what? I don't care if they were bad decisions, they were mine.
Yeah.
My hot take is that I don't think anyone under the age of 30 can have a Brat Summer. So I do think it is about that early 30s experience of like, this is where I am after leading a hedonistic lifestyle for the last 10 years. And you know what? My decision is to continue leading my
Yeah.
hedonistic lifestyle.
Yeah.
Um, so I thought that was captured through the music. And I think Brad Summer was like that perfect organic sort of branding moment where you're like, a lot of people want to have that kind of summer where they don't want to be questioning their decisions and choices over the last 10 years and continue having a good time despite whatever inner conflict they may be experiencing.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, I I think I thought it was like an interesting thing to look at both of them side by side because they were in that little chart war in the beginning of the year. And and it is true. I think in Sympathy is a Knife, like Charlie is singing about Taylor and is saying that I'm the opposite, I'm on the other side. And um the funny thing is that maybe they started off being opposites on the other side, but I think that it's very interesting. Like there may be like opposite sides of the same coin right now. But yeah, it was interesting to see how fans react to this sort of thing. Um, what I wanted to ask is, in the year 2024, what are the different ways in which you find yourself expressing your fandom?
Oh, I huh. I'll let you answer first, and maybe I'll like kind of piggyback off of you because it's a thinker.
Yeah. Um, so I feel like obviously this is expressing fandom beyond just listening to music.
Yeah.
And I started thinking about this because I felt like I was moving away from that central fan experience, which is to really listen to the music and relate to it, because I became very, very tuned into Twitter discourse, what's happening online, and I found that like one of the things that I would do, or I want to do this just generally because you want to observe culture, which is I felt I was expressing fandom by just sort of trying to be in the know, by keeping
Yeah.
up with everything, right? So I found myself doing that, which I think is a new thing for me because I did not grow up
Thinking
being a
about it.
fan in that way, right? Like
Yeah.
when I was younger, if I was a fan of something, I would like make fan art
Yeah.
or write fan fiction or make
Mm.
my little playlists, right? Like
Mm.
I would do those sorts of things, like that kind of fandom. If I had the ability to do this, I would maybe make fan edits as well, but I don't know how to work with video. But yeah, and of course, buying merch, that's another way in which you express your fandom. Being incredibly vocal in parties. I feel like those are all the ways in which
Recording this
I
podcast
recording
episode.
this recording this podcast episode. But
Yeah.
yeah, but I found the online stan community war that ends up happening, like the streaming wars, the who's gonna get to number one. I found that to be like a very disturbing, disappointing thing, which is one of the reasons why I've like mostly left Twitter for now,
Yeah.
because I feel like you stop listening to music when you get caught up in all of that. And
Yeah.
that's just not where you want to be.
I think, as someone who is sort of has become a pop fan again, especially in the past like 4 or 5 years, it's very different to be a pop fan versus, and I think like being a pop fan is similar to also being like a rap fan, but it's very different to being like an alternative indie rock fan. What I mean by that is I think that especially pop and rap artists, they have a very very public persona, but through their music they also, and have increasingly so, become a lot more specific about certain experiences and events in their lives, and also talk, like they very directly allude to other artists. So if you are listening to their music, in the case of Charlie, you listen to the song Girl So Confusing. Like that's you listen to the first song, then you read all this discourse, this is about Lord, and then they drop the song and it's featuring Lord. And like the thing is that like being a pop fan is like it's also some part of it, especially today, more so now than it has been before, being very very like hyper connected to, or trying to be hyper connected to, like the pop artist's personal lives. And I find myself like psychoanalyzing the pop artist in and of itself. Like, so I constantly keep thinking about how when the Tortured Poets department dropped, we were all expecting it to be a breakup album about Joe Alwyn, but he gets like one song on that album, and people are like, "Oh, what a snub!" Like she's completely like taken by Matty Healy and like doesn't really give a shit about Joe Alwyn. But I'm like, is that true, or is that like is it that maybe she just respects her relationship with Joe Alwyn a lot more, that she doesn't want it to be, you know she doesn't want any public discourse around it. So I've had these type of thoughts, so that's how I've been a fan, I guess. Like
Yeah, no,
psychoanalyzing pop artists.
no, you're absolutely right. Like being a pop fan kind of draws you into like all these extra musical things.
Yeah.
Um, Yeah, because pop music or anything popular is that intersection of like art, narrative, business, these signifiers. What does it mean to be a fan of something versus something else? Monikers. Are you a Swiftie? Are you, an angel? That's Charlie's fans, Charlie XCX's fans.
Hmm.
Um, so
And
yeah, no, I
Brat Army was being thrown around, I think. Was that,
Brat Army?
is that a
New
thing?
thing?
Is it a new
I I don't doubt it.
Okay.
Maybe it was.
Yeah, yeah.
Maybe it was a thing. But I think this has been a fascinating conversation about being fans, the nature of fandom in 2024, um, how that affects our relationship with music, um, what we look for in an artist, even. To end with, I wanted to ask you, what do you think is next for pop music? Like, what are you looking forward to in 2025? Who from the new crop of pop stars are you most excited about?
um I've I've really come to become a big Olivia Rodrigo fan. I think she is definitely cut from the Swiftian cloth. So I have liked a lot of whatever the music that she's put out, and I've been very excited about. I was like, when her debut came out, I was very excited about. It made me very excited about her sophomore. I really like how she owns like her music and influences. And a lot of these newer pop artists are sort of bringing back, or their influences are like the pop artists or the rock artists from when I was a teenager. So like that's interesting to me. But I'm very excited about Olivia. I'm interested in seeing how her career unfolds. I'm also interested in seeing how Chapel's career unfolds, not just as a musician, which she's, I mean, incredibly talented. And I think you and I had listened to her album last year, and it's very interesting to see the journey that it's taken this year. But I find it interesting, like her commentary on how she relates to fame and this sort of like shutting down of any kind of like, fan interaction and like don't approach me when I'm out in public. And there's also been like some instances of her kind of like yelling at the paps or like cameramen and things like that as well. So I'm I'm curious to see what that like where that goes, because I feel like it's kind of like a Gen Z attitude encapsulated in this pop star, wherein it's just kind of like it's the same thing of like, when I'm at work, but don't talk to me outside of work. It's that thing. And I'm interested in seeing how that unfolds over her career, because like, historically, as a pop artist, you're meant to be available to everyone at all times. But if you're someone who's choosing not to be, what does that mean? And how will
Mm,
that unfold? And that's I'm interested in that as well.
yeah.
Um, yeah.
No, for me as well, I think of everybody, like 100% Chapel for me. I recently posted on Blue Sky. I'm on Blue Sky now because I've left Twitter more or less. Um, but I recently posted saying that most all new pop girlies are varying combinations of Taylor, Ariana, and Lord, some combination of those three. So in my mind, Olivia is like Taylor and Lord.
Mm,
Sabrina is Ariana and Taylor. And I was listening to the new Rose album, and I felt like there were bits of all three of them
mm,
in her music as well, except for Aperture, which I
yeah.
thought was the best song. And she
Mm,
should do more music of that kind. But
yeah.
but Chapel, I don't see her neatly fitting in anywhere,
Yeah.
but she's still familiar in a very classic pop songwriting sense.
Mm,
The only other person I can think of vis-a-vis Chapel is Lady Gaga, and I don't
yeah.
think we've seen like a Lady Gaga acolyte
Yeah. It's like the
since.
Madonna, Lady Gaga, and then now Chapel. I feel like that's the sort of,
Yeah, and but
yeah.
it's but they've gone more like like it's moved more in a songwriting direction
Mm, exactly.
rather than the choreographed dance performance
Theatrics. Yeah.
theatrics, right? But there is theatrics in Chapel, so the
Yeah.
theatricality is there, but the theatricality is serving like a character and the songwriting and the story that she's trying to tell. And when I watched the video of her performing Pink Pony Club at Saturday Night Live, and the crowd starts singing, and she just says, sing it to the crowd, and that crowd of, I'm assuming, very
Yeah.
diverse people who may not necessarily be Chapel fans, singing the words back to her,
Yeah.
goosebumps.
Yeah.
Even the song that she performed after that, which was the new song, which was the gay country song.
I
It's
forget the
called The
name.
Giver. It's called
The
The
Giver.
Giver.
Mm,
Yeah,
yeah.
but the chorus is she gets the job done.
Yeah.
Um, I just feel like she's singing about something that is, I'm sure, like a growing experience for a lot of people, which is people um coming to terms with their sexuality. That's what she's sort of singing about quite often. And she's doing it in this very emotional way. And I, over time, have come to the conclusion that The Good Luck Babe is one of the best bridges I've ever.
Amazing. So good.
So,
Yeah.
so very
Yeah.
excited for her.
Yeah. Do you think that, I mean, I think about this, that like when we're like sort of thinking about the future of pop and where it's going to go from here, like we're seeing trends of like like the singer songwriter type of like personal songwriting, hyper specific songwriting being like imbued with pop musicality. I don't think that like that really defines this moment in pop, which is that pop music is hyper specific. It's very personal. Uh, that wasn't the case
Before Taylor. I
exactly.
think that's a Taylor thing
Yeah. It's a
for
Taylor
sure.
thing, and it's a very real Taylor influence. Like if you think about other pop artists, not Taylor of the 2000s, they're not doing this, you know. In fact, lyrics were kind of an afterthought. And I don't
Yeah.
think that's the case right now, which is very interesting. So,
Yeah.
um But yeah, okay. Very cool. I had a lot of fun recording this episode.
It was fun.
It was
Okay.
fun. All right. Okay. Here's to 2025.
New music in 2025. Yeah.
Hell yes. All right. Signing off. Bye-bye. Thanks so much for listening. Thinking People podcast is hosted by Sanaya Chandar and Ketki Sharma. Our producer for this episode is Yash Hirave.
You can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your audio content. Be sure to follow us at Thinking People Pod on Twitter or X and at Thinking People Pod on Instagram. If you'd like to get in touch, write to us at thinkingpeoplepodcast@gmail.com.
Stay tuned for our next episode.